I definitely want to introduce both Camille and Eli from Omada Health. When I think about companies that get the balance and the methods right around using behavioral science or behavior change science, data, human-centered design to help people change their behaviors and make gains and benefits in real health outcomes, Omada is at the top of this list. So I'm super excited to have you both. I respect what you do very, very much. And yeah, please tell us about the work that you've been doing with continuous glucose monitoring and type 2 populations and your journey to help people on their journey.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Dustin.
Go ahead and jump into our talk, which is called Data-Driven Behavior Change. We're super excited to be here. It's been a great conference so far. Just really excited to be part of the community and to be talking to you about something that is very near and dear to our heart at Omada. And before I dive into the introduction, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Camille to introduce herself, and then I will do the same.
Great. Thanks so much, Eli. It's great to be here, everybody. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Camille. I am a researcher and design strategist, and until really, really recently, I led user research at Omada Health, where I worked with Eli and a whole huge group of really amazing and talented and dedicated people who are working on behavior change for chronic conditions. Eli will share a lot more, but we focus on conditions like diabetes, hypertension, behavioral health, and a whole range of other kind of related health needs. I've been doing this kind of work in healthcare for a long time. And yeah, we're really excited to share some of what we've learned and done with you today. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm Eli. I lead the product design team at Omada, oversee the product lines that Camille just mentioned, so diabetes prevention, diabetes, hypertension, behavioral health, and MSK. Like we both kind of alluded to, we are a behavior change company at our core. And as we've grown from a diabetes prevention program to a multi-condition platform, we've really built on top of that foundation of behavior change. So we've journeyed into treating more chronic conditions. We've also, by doing so, cracked open a whole new world of member-generated health data through connected devices and self-monitoring. And that's really what this talk is about, how we might better deliver on the promise of personal health data through data-driven behavior change. And the impetus, which we'll reference many times in this talk, is a project that Camille and I, in addition to an amazing multidisciplinary team, who many of them are on the call today, so hello and thank you, worked to integrate continuous glucose monitoring into our type 2 diabetes program. For context, I think is important for this talk, traditional glucose monitors allow people with diabetes to self-monitor their glucose through the use of finger sticks, creating a singular data point at the time of sampling. And then they can make decisions in that moment based on the ranges that the readings kind of show them. So on the left, you can see the type of a data interface, the type of data UI that a traditional glucometer produces, which are essentially a series of readings, sometimes a couple in a day, sometimes one in a day, that can let you know where you're in range. And if we move over to the right side, you can see an example of continuous glucose monitoring, which produces a continuous stream of data indicating what your glucose is doing essentially at every moment of the day. And as you imagine, this unlocks an immense opportunity to better connect behavioral data like meal activity and physical activity to biometric data like glucose levels to facilitate those aha moments that can lead to an internalized level of understanding. So essentially really helping to understand the why behind what a person's body is doing. And as we start to dive into, kind of a complex world of behavior change and data, so on and so forth, we'll just start with like describing the 3 different types of data that we'll be referencing throughout this talk. We'll really be focusing on the first 2, but the 3 different types of data that we'll call out here is behavioral data, which is physical activity, food and water intake, stress and mood, sleep quality, medication adherence, care engagement, and biometric data, which we're all familiar with: body weight, blood sugar, or blood glucose, blood pressure, heart rate, so on and so forth. And then we have clinical data, such as clinical encounters, diagnoses, validated surveys, progress notes, labs, insurance claims, etc. And when we talk about behavior change, we're talking about the application of psychological methods in research to the development of products and services to promote a change in behavior. I love that description. That's actually directly from Amy's book, Engage, Amy Butcher's book, Engage. And I think it does a really good job of explaining it very crisply, right? And at Omada, we're essentially working to change 6 behaviors: food and nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress, medication, and self-monitoring. So before I turn it over to Camille, just to outline the goal of today's talk. So we're going to talk a lot about the opportunity and the problem that we're solving through this work. We're then going to present a framework that we used to start to solution inside of, as well as a set of principles that allowed us to deliver on the framework with some tangible examples of how we applied those principles into product experiences. So I will go over and turn it to Camille for the problem and opportunity.
Thanks so much, Eli, for laying that groundwork. So like we always do, or always try to, we're going to start with the problem, right, that we're trying to solve. What are we actually trying to help people do and accomplish here? So I want to show you first a really, really typical picture, right, of what we would call somebody's kind of personal health data ecosystem here. When they came to us at Omada, we see this all the time. Let's imagine that this is a young woman here with type 2 diabetes who's coming to us already tracking all of these things, right? Like many people with this condition and many people generally, she's generating tons and tons of health data through different tools, trackers, apps, what have you. Some of it's lifestyle and behavioral, like Eli defined for us just a moment ago. Things like the meal she's eating through MyFitnessPal, the activity data she's generating through Fitbit, her, mood and meditation tracking, right? Maybe through Headspace. Other is biometric data, like glucose data, weight that she's measuring on a scale at home, blood pressure, all of these things. And this picture here actually leaves out a lot of the clinical data that she'd be generating at her appointments, through labs and exams, this type of thing. But for simplicity's sake today, we're really just going to focus mainly on the behavioral and biometric data that she herself can measure and access and look at in her daily life at home. So there are a few things wrong with this picture. First of all, let's just imagine the experience, right, of tracking all of this data. Every day there's an overhead, a tax, a cost, right, on her time, her energy, her mental bandwidth just to generate this data long before she can actually use it or do anything with it. She's checking trackers, she's making sure devices are synced, she's putting on devices every day. For things like meal tracking, she's manually entering that and having to remember to do that after every meal and every snack. All of these add up to actually what can be quite a high cost, quite a high ask of her bandwidth, time, and energy. That's before she even tries to make use of this data and long before she's actually to use what she learns from this data to change or try to do anything else with her health behaviors. So now we've got that data, right? Let's look at the ability that she has or lack thereof to really make use of this data. I don't know how familiar, of course, everyone here in the audience is with diabetes, but it is a complicated condition, and the inputs and the outputs, right? What you do, the medication you take, what your body does, right? And then what you end up seeing in your health data, those relationships, those lines are not always straight lines. The dots are not always easy to connect. And for some, can be very difficult then to control. So like so many people, she's looking for what she can control, right? What is within her power to change and to direct, what she has leverage over. This is a pretty big, maybe even impossible ask, right, for her to take this data and figure out what these relationships are, and again, try to get somewhere where she can spot something that she can do something about. One of the challenges, of course, is that the data is stored siloed in all of these different places. So if she was trying to look for a relationship between her activity and her glucose, she needs to look just in 2 functionally different places. The data is structured differently, right? So very difficult to lay on top of each other. But one of the biggest challenges is actually even just knowing what to compare, right? Should she be looking at her activity and her glucose, or her meals and her glucose, or her sleep and her activity and her stress, right? The relationships between all of the things that she's doing and then how her health and her body and her glucose is behaving are very, very difficult to untangle. And we welcome people into Omada all the time who have expended so much energy up to this point without actually really getting anywhere, again, that they can do something about. So let's quickly look outside of the sort of diabetes picture and talk about just the tracking landscape and the personal health data generation landscape a little bit more broadly. Next slide, Eli. So out there in the health data marketplace, right, as we all know, a lot of us probably keep up kind of on the different apps and tools, or maybe even work for some of them, right, that are doing some of this work. There have been humongous strides in the last couple of years in our ability to, through biometric tracking or self-monitoring or kind of inputting data manually, really become aware of what's going on in your body and with your body in a whole new way. There's this host of tools now that allow you to take really amazingly deep and detailed dives into different bits of your personal health data, things like your heart rate variability or your sleep data. What kind of we can do now with this, what we can see when we look at this data is actually just really incredible, so impressive. Where we are seeing a little bit less progress so far is when we move into understanding. And some tools, what we have here are a couple examples, one from Apple's Health app, and then another one from a kind of manual tracker. I always get a little kick out of this one where somebody manually pieced together their sleep and then the phases of the moon, to see, is there anything there? But what we see in the Apple one here is heart rate and then sleep, right? So comparing your heart rate when you're asleep versus you're awake. And what we see a lot of this, right? These fairly simple correlations and relationships between a couple of your data sources. Again, just remember though that knowing which sources to pair and look for relationships with is one of the big challenges, right? To be able to make any value or draw useful kind of bits of understanding out of this. So we have a little bit of understanding happening after this, just awareness, just seeing what's in your data. And then a little bit also in action. So some of these apps and tools and products are beginning to offer, again, usually, big generalization here, but usually pretty simple prompts toward action. They're almost always going to be around whatever that tool specializes in, right? So we have a hydration or kind of personal goal setting tool here. If you set a goal around drinking water, it's going to nudge you to drink water, right? It's not going to go out of that and say, gosh, I'm also noticing that you're a little bit more stressed out lately. Maybe we should try something related to that. It's going to focus on what it's focused on, whether that's what you need or not. Same thing here with heart rate or with energy or with caloric output, all of these things, right? It's going to focus on what it specializes in, whether that's what you need or not. So if we move forward, Eli. So what we kind of asked ourselves is how we can leverage personal health data, all of this data that people are generating, and maybe even rethinking what the data is that people are generating to help people who aren't just interested in learning what's going on, because it's interesting and fascinating in what's going on in their bodies, who aren't just interested in optimizing their health and their fitness and their wellness, right? But to really help people with complicated and chronic health conditions, not just become aware of what's happening in here, but understand why it's happening and then act on that knowledge, act on that understanding to change their health behaviors in safe, effective, and sustainable ways within these more complicated health pictures. So this framework, this awareness to understanding to action, this is the framework that Eli mentioned that we use to ground all of the work that we did and that the team continues to do at Omada in integrating CGM data, continuous glucose monitoring data into the product. Like you said, that's the kind of the moment, right, that we were really spurred to look with fresh eyes at all of the data that we've been working with for a long time, behavioral data like meal tracking and activity tracking, these types of things. And when we brought in this new data source, because it was so detailed and robust, we saw that it really unlocked a whole kind of layer of new potential, right, in all of these other data sources. And so this framework, this flow, right, is what helped us kind of act on that potential. So what should it look like to move from awareness to understanding to action? In awareness, what we want to do is surface once health data has been generated, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But whatever health data you have, right, we want to surface not all of it, but what you need to see in that moment, right? And we want to help you look at it. Sometimes there are hard and difficult truths, right, to see in there, or scary observations that you see before you understand them. So we want to stand next to you and help you focus on the right data and begin to move toward understanding from there. When we get to understanding, we want to help you connect the dots, again, between the right data sources, right, at the right time, and connect between behavioral and biometric data, help you move from there into action. When we get to action, of course, like Ravi in the last talk, for those of you who are here, action is where we get toward that behavior change, right? You're taking action to change behaviors. It's really the holy grail here of what so many of us are working on. And we want to guide you from that understanding into not just any action, but the right action, the action that you're capable of, that is going to help you, that has a high likelihood of helping you move toward your goals. And not only do we want to make a recommendation, but we want to support you then in moving through that. And finally, you see this loop here, right? Once you've taken an action, your health picture changes again, right? Most of the time you take an action, something in your health data will change. If it doesn't change, that's also really good knowledge, right? That also helps you see and understand and maybe move toward another different action, right? We want to keep you kind of looping through this as you're working on behavior change, rather than what we see in the red here. I know it's very small text, but rather than expending so much energy just in the awareness, expending even more energy in understanding and piecing together data points that may or may not actually draw any useful relationships or help you know really why things are happening in your body, and then throwing spaghetti action at the wall. Again, we just see this so often when people come to us at Omada, that by the time they even reach the point where they're trying to change something, the way they eat or the way they move or how they're sleeping, they have expended all of their energy moving through awareness, understanding, and action, and are burned out before they even get there, right? So efficiency and focus and support moving through this is what we're really after. Next slide. We'll quickly just show a couple of these, and the slides are available, so you're welcome to dive into these later, but we have a couple examples here of just what it could look like, right, to move through this. Do want to recognize that you don't always need a bunch of support or fancy tools or to track things really rigorously for any amount of time to move through this flow. It can happen in just a moment, right? So maybe you notice that your glucose spikes after breakfast. You think about the fact that you're drinking orange juice a lot at breakfast, and you know that's a pretty sugary drink, and you decide to skip it for a few days and see what happens, right? You may not need our help or anybody's help to get there. It may just be something you come to at the breakfast table. But more often, again, in these really more complicated health pictures, we're going to see mysteries like I'm wearing a CGM now, and I'm noticing that when I'm sleeping, I have a low. My glucose dips overnight in kind of a scary way that I don't understand, right? So what could be causing it? Is it that I drank wine with dinner? Is it that I ate less carbs the day before than I usually do? Or that I started a new medication? Which one of those things is it, and what should I try next? And then what we want to see it actually look like, and this kind of green flow here, same mystery, same sporadic overnight low, but we see instead that with guidance, with support, with education, we're going to say, actually it's maybe none of those things. Maybe we need to look at a different data point. Maybe it's that you lost a few pounds recently, so the medication that you're already taking, have been taking, and haven't changed is actually affecting you differently. So the action that's going to help you most here is just seeing your doctor ASAP to make sure that you untangle that and are taking the right amount of medication for you, right? So I'll hand it back to Eli now, who's going to dive deep into how we built all of this into our program. And take it away, Eli.
Awesome. Thanks, Camille. So we've talked in depth about the problem and the opportunity. Thank you so much for that. And we've dug into the framework that we've used to start thinking through this level of complexity. And Camille just explained in detail how we do that. So now let's get into the guiding principles of how we can bring that to life. So looking at these three phases again, once again, we'll start with awareness. And just as a reminder, we're really working to surface the health data that is most important and meaningful to our people's goals, contexts, and conditions during the awareness phase. And we'll go ahead and dive into three principles for each one of these sections. So the first principle for the awareness phase is to make it personal. And in order for all of this to work, we have to tie the behavior of monitoring and tracking to a member's individual and unique health goals. The clinical indicators of progress like reduced A1C or overall weight loss have to be rooted in what's important and meaningful to our end user. If we don't tie this foundational behavior to intrinsic motivation, then the rest is pretty much, quite frankly, out the window. And we want to connect how a behavior like monitoring can help a person reach their personal health goal, like getting off insulin or having more energy to spend time with their families. So we help members identify that unique motivation as they onboard into our program and work to connect daily efforts like monitoring and reviewing progress back to that original reason for joining. Next up, we want to make it focused. There's so much, and Camille alluded to this and described this in detail, but there's so much a person managing one or multiple chronic conditions could be working on, whether that's food and activity tracking, weight tracking, glucose monitoring, and medication logs. We want to make sure that what a person is focused on closely aligns with their unique needs and condition. And as an example, the screen on the right shows a member that has recently shifted their focus to building a new medication routine, and their home tab is highlighting a relevant medication SMART goal. They're suggesting a specific piece of content that is related to that shift in focus, and they're using specific trackers that support that shift as well. And probably most importantly in this phase is we really need to build trust. So our members have to trust the data sources like the glucometers, the connected blood pressure cuffs, the connected scales, and understand how and when that data is synced and synthesized, so that they're going to trust the data-driven recommendations and insights that we deliver through coaching and software. So if we don't trust the origin and how the data is processed and how we use that data to make recommendations, then we're also going to there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities. So in the screen, you can see that, we're calling out how your CGM is being synced. We are surfacing today's averages and time and range, and also noting like when the last time that data was pulled from the device, as well as an affordance in the top right-hand corner to the information bubble to tap on that and better understand how we generate a series of different kind of insights and averages. Cool, so let's move on to understanding. Again, here we're hoping to help people understand how their data interrelates and how behaviors directly impact their health. The first principle inside of understanding, and I've heard this actually come up in a couple talks, which has been awesome to see this kind of across companies, is the goal here is all about fostering an internal understanding of why a person's body is doing what it does. To do this, we want to create connection points between biometric data like glucose, as you can see here on the right, and how meal quality, or as an example, medication adherence, have a direct impact on, again, in this example, their after meal blood sugar. We found through qualitative research that for members that were new to CGM, the first few days of having a connected glucose monitoring were very, very eye-opening, right? They'd never had this moment where they saw what their glucose was doing at every moment of the day. They're more used to seeing one blip in the radar or maybe two blips on the radar. And as an example, I actually wore a CGM for 2 weeks, and I learned firsthand how some of my guilty pleasure breakfast cereals were really shooting my glucose into an area that I honestly had no idea. These are things that are labeled as like healthy and whole grain and things at the grocery store, but we're really sending my glucose out of control. So a nice firsthand experience. Moving on, we want to educate in the moment. So as we begin to connect the dots for people, it's imperative that we educate in the moment to help foster that pursuit of understanding. At Omada, our care team plays a really crucial role, as does our condition-based curriculum. Both of those touch points, when orchestrated in unison, can help members triage and understand sometimes concerning health alerts. One of our content team's goals is all about servicing the right content at the right time to support members as they progress through their care plan. Moving on, we want to prompt for reflection. So we also want to provide multiple paths to reflecting. This is something our care team is doing daily, checking in, sending messages, but we also have designed in affordances for members to self-reflect by interacting directly with their health data in a meaningful way. And what you can see here on the right is an example of our notes feature, which allows members to add their experiences and reflections to specific data points that they might be concerned about. So flagging something for a coach to review, or something that they simply want to remember. And this step is really foundational to move into the action phase, which is what we're going to jump into next. And a reminder, here we're really trying to deliver actionable recommendations that a person can take to move towards their health goals. Easier said than done, right? So one of the first things we really want to double down on in the action phase is to guide with autonomy. Guiding with autonomy means we lean on protocols and behavior science to identify the next right action based on a member's condition and personal health goals, while always providing choice and shared decision-making opportunities as our members decide what they want to work on next. In this example, you see an instance where a member has completed their recent SMART goal. They're being prompted to either repeat that goal, start a new one, take a break from goals completely, or just check in with their coach. And this is just a small example of how we meet the basic psychological needs of autonomy in designing experiences for our end users. Okay, getting towards the end here. Next, we want to talk about how context drives care. So similarly, we know that our coaching and software has to respond to our members' evolving context. We need to be able to evolve the care plan based on today's capabilities, motivation, and barriers, not just the ones of yesterday. We know that life can change quickly. We want the care we deliver through our product to flex with those changes. And that means we might update what a member's care plan is based on shifting focuses that are informed by consistent remote monitoring. A great example that Camille kind of alluded to earlier is if a person has lost a serious amount of weight, they've been really focused on continuous monitoring and tracking and step tracking, we might need to shift a focus, maybe not away from monitoring glucose, but make a new an added focus all around that shift to adjusting medication and then building a new medication routine that can set them up for success as that kind of situation and path to care delivery changes. Awesome. And last but not least, celebrate effort, not just outcomes. I love that this one is last. It's maybe one of the harder nuts to crack, but here we know that that it's not just about seeing a dip in the scale or a consistent average in your glucose. You know, we really want to celebrate the outcomes, or sorry, the efforts that members are making. And they're needed to important, but equality is the energy and dedication our members make in working towards their goals in every way. This is a tough one, but a problem that we're chewing on right now. And here in this example, you can see that a coach is sending a message, really celebrating the added effort around physical activity before breakfast, how that impacted their glucose ranges and really be in a good spot, and then prompting what are some ways that we could potentially incorporate that similar type of effort that is working well for you at this time of day into other parts of the day where maybe glucose levels are much more out of range. So just an example of celebrating the effort someone is making, not just the outcomes that we're seeing. And I will turn it back to Camille to wrap things up.
Thank you so much again, Eli. So we'll jet toward the finish line here. I know we lost a couple minutes on our troubleshooting issues at the beginning. So as Eli and I were working on this talk and reflecting on, you know, if we could travel back in time to like late 2019, early 2020, when we were just beginning to bite off this big, complicated, but very exciting problem space, what would we want to leave ourselves with, right, to have in mind as we move forward? And so we came up with these 4 kind of meta principles or takeaways that we kind of boiled out of everything we've shared already. So the first thing here is remembering that for ourselves and hopefully for anybody who is making a product, a tool, a service that's asking anybody to track anything, remember that self-monitoring itself is a health behavior. So the act of tracking for somebody who hasn't been doing anything kind of related to their health or who is having a hard time kind of getting engaged or changing behaviors is a huge win. That's effort to celebrate. It also takes time. It takes time, energy, mental bandwidth, sometimes resources, right? So what we want to do at every turn is remember to treat it like the investment that it is. If you're asking somebody to track something, we need to make sure we are delivering value back. And again, in a whole bunch of ways to do this, but a key thing and harder done than said. The next one here is that data alone isn't enough. So as you noticed, this talk wasn't about how to build a kind of insight generation models, right, out of big complicated data sets, but it was really more about how to use really timely self-reflection prompts, right? How to ask simple questions at the right time about the right data for people to help kind of come to understanding on their own, to offer expert guidance, support in action once they've decided to take it, and relevant education. Always going to be more useful than the flashiest insights that you can create out of whatever data you have on hand. This is sort of obvious, but just to say, we're at a human-centered design conference, so I know this is all kind of in our blood, but we want to center their goals, not ours, at every turn. Again, much, much, much easier said than done. We just want to remember that we're a spoke in the wheel, right, of the big and kind of complicated lives, not just health, but whole lives of the people that we're working for and working with. So back to that, kind of data pie that we saw earlier. If you're a sleep tracking app, it is very, very difficult to remember that sleep isn't always what somebody needs to be focused on or wants to be focused on, right? If you're a diabetes program, it's hard to remember that diabetes is not always top of mind and the most important thing that somebody wants to be tracking, reflecting on, and working on, right? So centering their goals at every turn. And then finally, like, data is for doing things. Awareness is incredible. Understanding is powerful. But when it comes to your health, right, all of those things, we want to be using that to move toward thoughtful, strategic, focused action that's actually going to help move them toward their goals over time. Data is just an input, and the output is action, is behavior change. So as you're coming up with what do we want them to track, how are we going to surface it to them? How do we help them understand why what they're saying is happening? Remember that action is the last step there. So that's what we have today. Thank you all so much for being here. Huge pleasure to share all of this. Yeah, happy to take questions if we have time, but again, I know we're a little bit over, so.
Thanks so much. That was beautifully structured, really clear to see that process of connecting not only the dots between awareness and action, but how you've gone about, applying design and data and behavioral science throughout that process. I'm going to just ask one question as we are a little bit over here, but maybe at the end of the time we'll be able to loop back with you all and pull some questions in. I think where you're working, or your topic, is really interesting too. Looking at CGMs for folks with type 2, right, as it's traditionally been a type 1 tool. I'm wondering what is your experience? How are folks taking to using or to experimenting with CGM for type 2? What's that been like? What's the patient reaction?
Camille, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So like anything, people with type 2 diabetes span every kind of person. And so there's a huge variety of responses, right? Some people who are already kind of into data, right? And knowing what's going on in their bodies, love it. Other people, it can be a little bit scary sometimes, actually, to really see that overnight low example that we mentioned. Yeah. When you've spent sometimes years or even decades seeing just data points in your day, it can be incredible to see what's actually happening in your body all the time. It can also be a little bit overwhelming or a little bit scary, right? To know that, whoo, like this low has been happening maybe this whole time and I didn't know. Should I be worried? Should I be scared? Knowledge is powerful in kind of a whole range of ways. But for the most part, it is an absolute game changer for people. Again, to not have to inflict pain on yourself to get like one tiny snapshot of what's going on in your day, but again, get this sort of HD video, right, of what's happening in your body. And be able to draw some of those simpler correlations yourself between what's going on, what's going in your body, what you're doing with your body, and then what's happening inside of it. Absolute game changer for people. And it is a humongous career level privilege to get to do this work and try to make CGM, which on its own isn't it powerful, so powerful and such a game changer, to pair that with behavior change and what we at Omada kind of do so well and have done for so long was just really something else.
Yeah, and just to add to that really quickly, from a user experience perspective, I mean, the barriers that are removed through being able to just tap your phone on a sensor, get that reading in there, and all of the friction that is reduced in that process is just an added, just removes a lot of friction in managing a chronic disease, which is already, so it's fairly laborious. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different touch points, but I think a quote from research that we heard was, this is my awesome meter, right? Like, I love this thing compared to the experience that I've had before. And I think any way that we can improve someone's life that significantly through design and through experience, that we're just really excited to be able to offer that to our members.
Awesome. Thank you. Again, yeah, that was a beautiful presentation. I think, for anyone, I think your slides are an excellent blueprint on how to think about it and do this kind of work. So I really appreciate getting up real early on your end and coming to be with us. So let's see if we can loop back around. But anyways, eternally grateful, and talk to you again at some point.
Thank you.